Hello and welcome back to another episode of DIY 101 with yours truly, moi. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of a two-part epoxy. Stay tuned. So for those of you who follow me, you know that last week I created a video talking about the pros and the cons of an E6000 glue. And I thought just because many of us crafters, if not all of us as well, also have another type of adhesive in our box called a two-part epoxy, I would go ahead and make a video so that with this information as well as the information I shared with you last week, you will be able to make an educated decision when you are going to choose which adhesive is better for the projects that you are going to create. And so without any further ado, the pros of a two-part epoxy, and let me go back a little bit just to say a two-part epoxy, of course there are many brands, is going to be an adhesive that comes in one package, excuse me, but that package will have two barrels. One barrel will hold your adhesive while the other barrel will hold your hardener, and you will have to, using a plunger, squeeze out equal amounts, or that epoxy is going to come in two containers, one again with the adhesive, the other with the hardener that you are going to have to measure using a little measuring cup, equal parts to stir together to create the amount that you are going to need. And so one of the pros of an epoxy is that it is triply water, humidity, and solvent resistant, meaning that, and especially for those of you in the more humid areas like in New Orleans or in Florida, I've learned from the comments from last week's video, you will be able to use a two-part epoxy when putting together your projects and have peace of mind that these projects are going to hold together. The second pro that we're going to talk about is that a two-part epoxy is self-leveling, meaning two things. And for those of you who have followed me creating over the past few months, you would either hear me say one or two things. One either being use copious amounts, and if you go back and you check, that is going to be said when we are working with glass pieces that has a lot of ridges in them, and you're using copious amounts to make sure that that glue is going to get into all those nooks and crannies and give you a nice secure adhesion. Or I would say to you, not much epoxy is needed for this project because we are gluing smooth pieces together. So the other pro with this epoxy is that that glue is self-leveling and that it fills in gaps. Excuse me. The third pro that we're going to talk about is that an epoxy sets in about 15 minutes and it cures in roughly 24 hours. And for those of you who watched last week, we know that the difference between an epoxy and the permanent glue like an E6000 is that an E6000 sets in 24 hours, not like what we previously believed, and cures in up to 72. So if you are working with a project that you would like to have completed sooner rather than later, an epoxy might be the better adhesive for you. The next pro that I like to share with you is that an epoxy, and this one I'm very excited about, does not leak. And corporate E6000, I'm still waiting for you to call me, but that epoxy does not leak, especially if you're working with the one that comes in the container that is a plunger. You can push down to get the equal amounts of both liquids that you need, and when you are finished you can simply pull back on that plunger and all of the excess moves from the nozzle, and you can very easily and very efficiently cover your epoxy and not lose any of it. All right, and last but not least, epoxy dries crystal clear. And this is why, my darlings, I will say to you that I love to use a two-part epoxy whenever I am working with glass, so that if any of that glue has to run or get on any other pieces of my glass, I would be able, sorry, I'm trying to get my daughter to get something for me without actually talking to her, but it should have been easier just to talk to her because it took a while to tell her what I wanted. But, excuse me, it would be easier or better if you're having spills or leakage and not having to worry too much about the final look of your project if you are not able to clean up all of it. All right, so those are some awesome pros. Thumbs up. Two-part epoxy. Now here are the cons, and once again, this is where we get into, do I want to create a lovely piece so that I can showcase to my friends or family, or do I want to literally hold my life in the palm of my hand? And of course, you know, if you have used a two-part epoxy before and you have inhaled those noxious fumes, I mean, you can put two and two together and realize that depending on the brand of epoxy that you use, it can be toxic or hazardous to your health. And so, once again, to preempt that, of course, you know, when you're working with any sort of adhesive that has a strong scent, you are going to work, my darlings, in a well-ventilated area. You are going to wear either a mask or a respirator, and you are also going to cover your skin to make sure that none of that toxic adhesive gets onto your skin, which can easily get into your bloodstream. All right, another con is that epoxy, once again, while it's wet, can be, flammable. And so once again, working in a well-ventilated area can preempt some of that, and working around, or I should say with no flames around you, also would be a very wise idea. Okay, another con that we're going to talk about today is that your epoxy has to be mixed prior to being used, and this can either go as a pro or it can go as a con, because whereas like your E6000, you can just open the tube, you take out what you need, quickly cover it back and hope not to lose too much. With the epoxy, you're going to have to mix what you need, right, before you can apply it to what you're going to be adhering. And then if, here's a con now, you do not use whatever is left over, let's say in a period of 5 to 7 minutes, that epoxy is no longer viable and you are going to have to mix up another batch to complete your project. All right, so there you have it, my darlings, the pros and the cons of a two-part epoxy. And like I said, the decision when deciding to use adhesives to complete your project is entirely and 100% up to you, but I just wanted to make sure that you had the information that you needed to make an educated decision when choosing to use some of these projects. So my darlings, I hope that this information has been helpful to you. If you have any further questions, please be sure to place them in the comment section below. I'm going to continue next week in this series with a segment called jewelry adhesions, because that is a question that came up. And so if you have any other questions about any other adhesives, please be sure to ask me in the comment section below. I will do my research and I will just continue to add to these series until all of your questions have been exhausted. And so, my darlings, until next time, I say to you, please, please, please take care of yourselves for me. Excuse me. Know that I love you all. Mwah. Mwah. Bye now.